Welcome to another episode of Intelligence Conversations, where experience meets insight. In this episode, Neil Bisson, retired Canadian intelligence officer and director of the Global Intelligence Knowledge Network, sits down with Susan Miller, a retired CIA case officer with an extraordinary 39-year career in intelligence operations. From assignments in Russia, Malaysia, and Israel to leading the CIS's China Mission Center, Susan brings a wealth of first-hand knowledge to the conversation. Together, they examine the growing global influence of China's intelligence apparatus, an organization operating without the oversight or financial limitations common in the West. The discussion explores China's ambitions for economic dominance, the evolution of its offensive technical and supply chain operations, and the implications for Western critical infrastructure and political systems. Susan also reflects on the personal side of intelligence diplomacy, her current role training future CI officers, and her work helping American companies address supply chain vulnerabilities. She closes with thoughtful advice for women entering the intelligence field and the value of diversity in human operations. Stay tuned. This is a conversation packed with insight, experience, and real-world relevance.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Intelligence Conversations. I'm Neil Bisson, your host and a former intelligence officer with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service and the director of the Global Intelligence Knowledge Network. With me today, I have Susan Miller. Everyone say hi to Susan. She is a former case officer. I got to remember that, case officer as opposed to intelligence officer with the Central Intelligence Agency. And Sue is going to be talking to me today about all things China. So for our listeners, Sue, maybe you can give us a little bit of a rundown of what your background is and why you are so much of an expert when it comes to what's going on in China.
Okay, so I was with the CIA for 39 years. And as I've told you, Neil, that means I started when I was one. And I originally came in as what's called a case officer, an operations officer. These are the people that do the spying for CIA overseas by running agents of foreign countries that we're paying for the information, usually a lot of money
Mm-hmm.
for them to basically commit espionage against their own country.
Right.
And so I started off doing Russia,
Mm-hmm.
Moscow, USSR, and then did Russia all over the world, in a number of other places.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got sort of bored of Europe, I decided to go do a tour in Malaysia. And I was the chief of station there, which is the head of the CIA office abroad. And we were still working on 911 terrorists and finding them. Some of them were from Malaysia and still hiding out and doing things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was there I really fell in love with the whole Asian enterprise.
Okay.
And so I came back from that tour and headed up our East Asian mission center at that time.
Right.
And that included China and all of East Asia.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was how that worked out. I did a couple of other things. I did some counterintelligence and this and that. And then I went back out to Israel as chief of station more recently, just left there a couple of years ago.
Right.
And while I was there, I made the big bad mistake of our director came to visit, the director came to visit, and I didn't screw up the visit
Oh.
because at the end of it, during these long rides in armored cars from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, he's like, I'm thinking I want to do more on China because the threat and blah blah blah, and he went into some things I'll be going into in a minute.
Right.
But I said, oh my gosh, finally somebody is interested in this because that's the real strategic threat.
Mm-hmm.
That's the real threat to America, and not terrorist groups. Yes, we have to deal with those and we have to, sometimes go to war because of something else. But bottom line is that is the real threat. And he's like, great. And then 2 weeks later, I get a call from him. And it's usually, there's always calls because there would have been rockets in Israel the night before and blah, blah. And I said to him, I said, "Oh, the rockets are fine." He goes, "I'm not calling about rockets this time." And I said, "Oh, okay, what?" And he says, "Remember when I asked you about the China Mission Center?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "I'm doing it." I'm saying, "Thumbs up," and I'm still waiting. He says, and I could tell from his voice, and I had a view of the Mediterranean Sea from my office.
Sounds pretty nice.
Tel Aviv. I closed the curtains as he was
Uh,
talking because I knew what was coming, and
oh
I knew
no.
to say yes. There was no reason not to. I didn't have young kids with me. My husband was a tandem assignment. He was working in the consular section
Hmm.
because we didn't have young kids and things like that. It was just a lot easier. So I came back about 8 months before he came back, and
Okay.
we visited each other a couple times in between.
Hmm.
But and I set up the China Mission Center, and the whole purpose of it, like the director said, was to look at China and China influence and China operations, everything that they are doing all over the world, and
Hmm.
work with our allies on how we can together try to push back.
So did you find that eye-opening experience by looking at it from that perspective, where you're trying to figure out what the Chinese operations are, what their influence operations are, just how much they're trying to have an influence on the rest of the world?
Yes. And they absolutely are.
Hmm.
They are bigger. They are because China and Russia, frankly, are run by dictators.
Hmm.
They don't have a Congress to go to ask for money.
Right.
And so they're so much more well funded than we are.
Hmm.
They're well funded. They have a lot more people, et cetera.
Hmm.
But the good news about the people working for them versus the one working for us is there's a lot of people over there that are like, "Oh, I'll come and do this because I get good money and I get some benefits, but I don't really like my country either, sort of thing."
Oh, so you're talking
And
maybe a target-rich kind of environment for someone who's looking for someone to,
yeah, that would be
yeah,
okay if
do the things that we do.
we could go do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, the bottom line is that we needed to take a global approach to it, and that meant going around the world and talking to sister intelligence agencies
Hmm.
in Africa and South America, in Southeast Asia and Asia, et cetera,
Hmm.
about the PRC threat and what we see it as the scope of it, I guess is what I want to say, because it's very different than
Right.
what the scope of the Russians was.
Are you seeing it? So, like from your perspective and from what you've worked on, what are the main objectives that you're seeing of Chinese intelligence activities? Is it purely about economic and military dominance, or are there other strategic drivers? Like, how are you seeing like the push that they're doing?
So they want economic dominance, and frankly, we are willing partners in that.
Mm,
And so I don't necessarily blame them. And actually, this is the one piece that's kind of working in
okay.
the sense we have an economic, we have some economic ties to them,
Hmm.
and you can say that that's one thing that seems to so far be apolitical, but it could be used by
Hmm.
them in the future, especially as they start getting more and more indigenous supplies,
Right.
more and more things that they can do themselves
Hmm.
against us. So that's the economic side of things.
Hmm.
From the and here's how they help their economic side of things as well.
Right.
They go down and they go and buy basically governments.
Right.
And I don't mean necessarily with a suitcase full of
Right.
cash
We're not talking
like
just
that.
pure corruption here. We're talking other ways.
We're talking about, hey, I will buy all these minerals from you, but in
Right.
the UN, you need to do your vote this way,
Hmm. Yeah.
or I will do X and I will actually give you money.
Yeah.
And it's something that we don't do. We do influence operations, don't get me wrong,
Right.
but usually they're a little bit more in your face. Like
Yeah.
it comes on a diplomatic area
Hmm.
in intel channels and economic channels, et cetera.
Hmm.
We don't go and bribe a government to be on our side so our economy can get better. We're looking for secrets. And
Right.
so this is what's different is that's what I mean by they really want to take over the world. You can see them building platforms near the Philippines to
Hmm.
launch Navy ships from. You can see them trying to do that in other places around the world. And the problem for these other poor countries is what they realize is that the PRC government will say, this is going to be 50-50, and it never is.
Right.
It
Right.
never is
So
because they hold all the everything, all the cards.
all the cards for the
Yep.
term that the
As a
current
poker player
U.S. Yeah,
myself.
yeah, there you go. So they sometimes they try to make sure that they have the winning hand no matter what, right?
Right.
So you're looking at this from the perspective of like, how has China's approach to intelligence collection evolved from what we've seen maybe in the last 10 or 15 years? Like, how has it changed? Because personally, myself, I kind of cover a lot of news articles that deal with intelligence operations, and I'm seeing certain things happen in different parts of the world. Like,
Hmm.
over the last couple of months, there was an issue where Alice Guo, who was a Chinese intelligence operative, became the mayor of a town in the Philippines, and you're seeing how espionage operations, are happening all over the world, and China is basically backing some of these operations. So, from your perspective on the way that you've worked with different things and the different people that you've worked with, how are you seeing this evolution? Like, what's changing now?
So what's changing is that they are putting more money on it, and it's almost like it's their total fixture right now.
Hmm.
They have more money to do it.
Right,
They have more time to do it, and you've got one dictator who wants it done, and he's got people who are like willing to do it.
right.
They're going for it. And so you mentioned about, Chinese intel and what all of this implies. So first of all, you can bet that they have a program in every single country around the world
Hmm.
to recruit whoever they can. Now, every every service like mine,
You're right.
Brits and everybody around the world, the smallest one in, I don't know, Mongolia would have it too.
Hmm.
I want to find a spy who in some service somewhere that I care about and I need to know and I
Hmm.
want to hear something. That's different than what the Chinese are doing.
Okay.
We have done, CIA, we do technical operations. You go to the Spy Museum, you can see some of the old ones where we
Hmm.
would put a bug in an ambassador's conference room or they would put one in ours and,
Right. All
guys,
part of the big game.
and that's all technology. This is so different because now they're not only doing the same thing, and
Hmm.
you have different ways to do it now with ones and zeros and all the rest.
Right.
They are also doing it in an offensive way. And I
Okay.
don't mean offensive, like we're offended. Yes, we are.
It can be
But
pretty
I'm
offensive when they're
talking
doing it. Yeah.
about they have a defense like we do, and but now they are going on offense. And what I mean by that is they are thinking, and they're really good at this in a way that we in the West aren't because we're a democracy and
Right.
we are ADD, all of us, and we kind of
Right.
think
Yeah.
to another.
Hmm.
And so what they are doing is they're thinking, you know what? Maybe in the next 10, 20 years, we might need to go to war somewhere in the world.
Right.
We might need to go to war in Australia. We might need to go to war in Indonesia. We might
Hmm.
need to go to war here, there,
Right.
India, America,
Taiwan. Yeah.
Taiwan for
Hmm.
sure.
Hmm.
They've actually said that out loud.
Yeah. I
So,
think that's one of their, top
yeah.
priorities. Yeah.
And so because of that, what they love to do is what we call supply chain operations.
Oh, okay.
So, what I'm talking about, and supply chain operations is not something new but it's new on this. The level they're doing at it is what's new. So, I'll give you an example of a very simple supply chain operation that I might do.
Okay.
I know a Russian is using a certain cell phone.
Okay.
And I know he's not recruitable. I'm not going to go after him, but I also knows that he puts the cell phone when he goes to the spa every week in this one little niche.
Right.
Now, a supply chain operation would be grabbing that cell phone
Hmm.
and putting something on it that sucks all the data out of it, like right away, but
Right.
also leave something on it so that we can still use that somehow to either get conversations in the room or, do different things like that, right?
Right. Right.
That's kind of your more, I hate to say it, traditional
Right.
supply chain operation.
Almost like
But
a
they are
technical op, really.
it's a technical op,
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
But you're using a supply chain to get it to them.
Right. Hmm.
You recruit, the guy at the phone store to hand him this one, not that one, or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Give me
That
the
is
one with the
so
big X on the
little.
top.
Yeah, exactly. And
That won't
but
be noticeable at all.
exactly. But it is so very different. So what I'm talking about is China is thinking about the next 10, 20 years.
Hmm.
They're thinking about, you know what, we might be going to war with Europe if they stop trading with us for some reason.
Right.
We might go to war with India. We might go to war with America.
Hmm.
And if that's the case, We want to win that war.
Hmm.
And they know they have never been tested in a modern war. They know we have,
Yeah.
and they know Europe has.
Hmm.
They have never. And so they're worried.
Right.
And so they want to be able to do things on a grand scale. Like, wouldn't it be nice to be able to turn off the whole western part of the United States and Canada
Yeah.
power systems
Hmm.
in a time of war,
Right.
or water purification systems so you can't
Hmm.
drink water anymore?
Yep. So we're
Or,
talking attacks on critical infrastructure that could make a
yes,
huge difference, right?
yes. And they have plans to do that
Hmm.
all over the world.
Right. Right.
And that is what actually you've been talking about. It sends a chill down my spine
Yeah.
because that's something that is that you can just imagine the chaos that would cause.
Right. Well,
And
people have a
so,
tendency to panic, right? So you
right,
take away the things we take for granted every day. You turn the light switch on,
right,
you expect lights, and you expect heat in your house, and you expect
right,
purified water. You start shutting that stuff down, and North America isn't prepared for that. That is
right,
a psychological hit to them from the very beginning. So that puts
right.
you on the back foot. And yeah, I see
Yeah,
where you're coming from. Like we've seen this before, time and time again, where we talk about these critical infrastructure infiltrations, cyber
yes,
ops, cyber espionage, cyber security, like
exactly.
huge. Yeah,
And that's very similar because if you're able to not just suck out the ones and zeros, but mess with the ones and zeros, picture
yeah,
that.
for sure, for sure.
Um,
So, what would you say? Like, you've had a lot of experience from the Russian side, you've had a lot of experience from the Middle Eastern side as well, and you've also had experience, obviously, in the Chinese side. So, if you had to do a comparison, like if we're looking at, okay, here's the threat from China, here's the threat from Russia, here's the threat from Iran, how would you categorize and how would you prioritize these? If you were the head of an intelligence organization, what would you say? Okay, we need to look at this first, and this is our biggest concern.
mhm. So that's actually relatively easy, but it's big. Um,
Hmm.
it's not easy to implement. So how would I prioritize the different threats, is what you're saying,
Pretty much.
as well as how we what we can do against it? So human is the kind of threat that can really mess up agents, CIA all over the world, et cetera, et cetera. Does
Hmm.
it affect daily American life? Probably not. And
Okay.
so that's something that we've been doing, the spy versus spy thing, for so many years.
Hmm.
When it comes to regular technical ops, like sneaking something into, uh, we had, these teams that could go into like, a room and, put something somewhere, right?
So like a bug implant or something like that.
A bugging plant. That also is going to get you some really good information that you would not have otherwise gotten.
Right.
What it doesn't get you is what the PRC is looking at. When they're on our infrastructure, they
Hmm.
can go suck information out of that
Right.
and get some good intelligence about things. Maybe nothing, they're going to get a bunch of bad intelligence too, like we do from everything,
Yeah.
things where, I thought I was going to be getting some really cool intelligence on, some Russian military something,
Hmm.
and all I'm getting is intelligence from the economic sector, I mean, but
Right.
you're getting it, but it's not as good.
Hmm.
Difference is that they're bigger and better, so they can get when they get onto power grids. That means they can get onto phone lines.
Hmm.
That means they could come up with all kinds of different ideas around the world to get on any different trunks and all the rest of stuff. They can do that eventually. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't, yeah, no idea if they're doing that, but bottom line is that's the kind of thing that we have to be worried about.
Hmm.
One thing to kind of do one, like I said, one thing at one house at a time. It's another
Right.
thing to be sucking in all of this data. Now, to be careful about this,
Hmm.
this is what NSA does.
Right.
You pick up the bits and bytes out of the air
Hmm.
and you find somebody who can decrypt it and then you send it down somewhere else and then they put it in a report. And that's
Right.
exactly what the Chinese are doing. But they have the structure of NSA times 50 to,
Wow.
to do that.
Hmm.
They're very careful and very slow. And there is zero doubt that they have been looking at infrastructure all over the world.
Right, right.
And again, that's the kind of thing that they have the patience for that we don't in our 4-year bits and bytes.
And I think you just hit on a really great point here that, this is what I took from my time as an intelligence officer with CSIS was
Mhm.
the Chinese, they have two things going for them. One, they have a larger, basically focused infrastructure that they can focus out at the world. Just because the numbers are there. They just have the numbers and they're willing to put the money from their government into those operations. And
Right.
it's like we were talking about. The North American mentality is very ADHD. It's like, okay, what's today's problem? What's tomorrow's problem? Whereas from the Chinese perspective, it's like, what's the 20-year problem? What's a 20-year goal?
Right.
Whereas for North Americans, we're just worried about, well, who's our next leader going to be? And,
I know.
because we know everything will shift, right? Like whether it's the next US president or the next Canadian prime minister, it's like, okay, well,
Or the
priorities are
next
going to
Congress
shift.
or the next
Yeah,
parliament. It all
exactly.
changes.
Exactly. And it's funny because that kind of leads us into the next question. Canada is in process. You guys just recently had your president back up and going. The Trump is now in charge. And we're in the process of going through our federal elections. Now, the interesting part is that as China stays solid in what their goals are, no matter who takes over, if it's Xi or the next guy, they're going to still be looking at the same thing, world dominance.
Hmm.
How are we going to deal with everybody if something goes wrong? Our But what they're doing is they're also looking at our political systems and they're seeing, I don't want to call them weaknesses, but maybe just vulnerabilities.
Vulnerabilities.
Yeah. So they can look at this and they can say to themselves, okay, well, Canada's going to be hiring a new prime minister. And we had a huge issue with this just recently where we did a huge thing on foreign interference. So how
Mhm.
China, Russia, Iran, Pakistan, India, all of these other countries are trying to affect our political
Right.
system. So,
Right.
and you talked about this a little bit about before that you had worked on some things from the foreign interference perspective. How do you
Yeah.
see what's happening with China and what they're doing on their scale?
Yeah. So certainly, as we know, back in 2016, the Russians tried to influence the elections here in America.
Hmm.
And I think over the years, all of us have seen dribs and drabs of this, but
Right.
nothing on the scale. That was the one that was at a scale that kind of set us all back, and we started thinking about this. And we started to think about ways that it could be done. You could get onto a website, you could open a fake website that
Hmm.
looks like something that's pro-American and then slip in things
Right.
that actually hurt our constituents.
Right.
America, the constituents in America, all the people in America,
Hmm.
their ability to trust the government and
Right.
trust elections and
Hmm.
things like that. And so, yeah, so when back in the day, election boxes were not an issue, but nowadays there's electronic election boxes, et cetera.
Right. Hmm.
I recently did an election. It was a local Virginia election. I went
Okay.
to, I don't know if it was a congressperson or whatever, but they had two people sitting there with the ballot boxes, but everything was done and
Manually.
electronically.
Oh, electronically. Oh, okay.
Right, you stick the thing in. I think they do some QC, but not all of it, just some
Right.
QC to make sure it's doing the right thing.
Hmm.
But think if you could get into those election boxes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you did some kind of a supply chain
Hmm.
action where all of our election boxes were either, some Russian funded company or from some China funded company,
Right. Right.
we'd be doomed.
Yeah.
We wouldn't, we, first of all, you would lose faith in it once people found out about it. But secondly, it's one of those things that, wow, that's a very basic
Yeah.
part
Yeah.
of a democracy is
Right.
I get a vote.
Right, right. And
Everybody
everybody
gets
thinks,
a vote.
yeah, everybody thinks that because they do get a vote, that their voice
Yes.
gets to be heard and that that's
Yeah.
not going to be altered. Like, why would someone want to alter
But-
that, right?
Right, exactly.
And I think
And
it's,
so,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it's one of those moments where, and I know Canada's dealing with that right now too, is misinformation, disinformation on different political candidates. There was a news article that just came out yesterday where Chinese WeChat
Oh,
article was talking about either saying that one candidate was better than the other or one candidate wasn't as good as the other. So,
yes.
it's really to the point now where I think Canada had a wake up moment over the last
Hmm.
couple of years, and they're like, our political systems are being manipulated, and we have large diaspora living in our country, whether it's from China, India, a lot of
And
Eastern Europeans. So
yeah,
if they're looking at their own news from WeChat or from Facebook or something like that, and they're getting their information from there, they might not be getting
right,
accurate information. And this is something that our political adversaries, our foreign enemies, are taking advantage of.
right.
Yeah.
And it makes me think that, our elected leaders, whether at the state or province or, federal level, should be probably doing a little bit more education about this, is that
Hmm.
we're working on this. We are working
Right.
on this. We're going to make sure it doesn't happen, et cetera,
Yep.
and spend some funds on it. I'm pretty sure there is some that's already being done, but it's always so hard. Do
Hmm.
you do one more F-35 fighter, or do you do one of these? I
Exactly.
mean,
Yeah.
it's really hard
Hmm.
for us to do, but that is something that all of us democracies need to bring together
Yeah.
and be very careful and work on and try to think about that. Yeah.
Yeah, like from my personal perspective, I think one of the bigger issues is that all of the Western nations that are democracies are dealing with this issue, whether you're the European Union, whether you're the United States,
Right.
whether you're Canada, everyone has a similar political system. The one advantage that Canada has had is because we have such a smaller population, we're not relying as much on those digital type devices to
Right.
monitor all of it's really kind of old school where it's like, okay,
Right.
put your X by the name, drop it in, and there you go kind of thing.
Yeah.
But one
Yeah.
of the disadvantages that we have is that it's, because it's a more of a party system, a socialist system where you're voting for a representative in your riding who represents that party, as opposed to saying, well, I want to vote for this prime minister.
Right.
It does lead itself open to that foreign interference from the side of individuals who may be within the political system themselves who are being influenced. And we've
Right.
seen that too, right?
Yes.
So,
100% right.
yeah. So
Yeah.
and I don't think most individuals who aren't in national security intelligence or have had the opportunity to kind of see it from that perspective even consider that. So when you've got someone who's in Congress or you've got someone who's in the Senate who's voting for something that you think would be, well, wouldn't that be more advantageous for the Chinese or the Russians if they said yes on this
Yeah.
ballot? You really got to start asking yourself, like, is this,
Right.
and has this person been vetted? So,
Right.
and
All of the above.
yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah.
and I don't know if there's any easy answers for any of this, except that continued exchange of information. Because if they're
Yeah.
coming after Canada, they probably already come after the States, and maybe we pick something up. Like this is one of those things where you have to be focused on your self-interest, right? And we know that. Like when it
Yeah.
comes to what's happening in Canada, we got to be concerned about what's happening in
Yeah.
the Canadian
100%.
political system. But at the same time, we may be coming across information in relationship to if they're doing it here, they're probably doing it, they could be doing it in Virginia, they could be doing it somewhere in southern Texas, they could be doing it somewhere in
Exactly right.
California. So this is where
Right.
we have to kind of see those individuals who are traveling back and forth across the borders, who are representatives
Right.
of different groups and different organizations.
Yeah, and the good news is that especially our Five Eyes partners and our close European partners and our
Hmm.
close Asian partners, we actually do a lot of exchanges of
Yeah.
intelligence
Hmm.
to show what's happening to us, or maybe we'll find something that's happening to Canada, but not to us.
Right.
And that's the kind of information that we do share with the intel organizations,
Hmm.
which is cool. That's very proactive, etc.
Right.
Problem, of course, comes when we are telling them about something, or they're telling us about something that's happening on our soil that's 20 years old.
Right.
And that's where it gets more hard
Yeah.
to actually fix that sort of thing. And again, I'm talking about the supply chain type operations and things like
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
primarily. But the good news is that we do have this close, and I'm hoping it continues to be extremely close collaboration.
Right.
My friends who are still working in the various agencies around are saying that so far so good.
Yeah.
So I'm feeling good about that.
I think what we should try to impart to the listeners is the fact that, yes, intelligence organizations do get their marching orders from above, but those relationships that we form
Mhm.
abroad, or even, you coming up to
Right,
Ottawa, us going
right,
down to Washington, or going down to Langley. I mean, all of that basically builds that personal relationship. So,
right.
it's going to take a lot more than the decisions of politicians to kind of break that up. So
It is.
I'm trying to throw out a little bit of, to give our listeners a little bit of reprieve from, the horrible news about, well, what happens if Canada gets kicked out of the Five Eyes, and how come Canada and the United States won't share information anymore? I don't really see that happening anytime soon. I mean, political environments change, but the relationships between the individuals in those
Yeah,
organizations usually stays pretty strong.
it really, really does.
Yeah,
And it goes, as you said, maybe we got something really cool done with ex-British,
right,
service under a certain prime minister
right.
and under a certain president that we had. But what I find is we get Y done with the next group and Z done with the next, and that goes with Canada too.
Right, right.
And so it seems to be that we do a really good job at getting over let the politicians be the politicians, let them,
Hmm.
but at the same time, often what happens is what we call intelligence diplomacy.
Right.
When other things break down, the intelligence services still talk.
Yeah, yeah.
And we can do that in a way sometimes that it's more like a one off or two off or three off or whatever we are
Hmm.
around the world, but we can do that in a way and very frankly, and get those words up to somebody who can use them.
Right.
That's in our actual government,
Hmm.
Senate, Parliament, presidency. So
Right. And hopefully, if they're
yeah,
smart enough, they'll listen to them, because there's a reason why we're called intelligence, right? We're
right.
getting that information to you so you can make the right decisions.
And
So,
because we're intelligent,
yes, that's right.
nobody about a blonde from California, but that's okay.
Well, you're pretty intelligent from where I'm sitting, I'll tell you that. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about, okay, so you're recently just out of the CIA, but you're still doing some work. And if you can talk a little bit about some of the stuff that you're still involved in, why don't you let us know what's going on there?
Yeah, sure. So, what happens in any intelligence community, including the Canadian one, is there are people that actually work for the actual agencies, right?
Right.
And they are what we call here blue badgers. I'm not sure what the Canadian service calls it,
Hmm.
but you're fully employed by that organization.
Right.
In addition to every one of those organizations also hires people who are formers who have security clearances to come back and be an expert on something. So that would
Hmm.
be like some super duper scientist that used to work for CIA,
Right.
now comes out and NSA says, "Boy, we could use you, but we have you on a contract
Right.
instead,"
Right. Hmm.
and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
And then the other thing that you can do, and I call this as part of give back. I had such a great career. I had so many great adventures. I raised my kids overseas. I feel like I still want to give back in retirement.
Hmm.
I don't mind a little bit of extra money, but frankly, government pensions are fine,
Right.
and all of that. It's just that I want to keep giving back. And so what I'm
Hmm.
doing, I'm helping a couple of companies that provide either widgets or people across the US government, and I believe to some of our Five Eyes partners,
Right.
guidance on some supply chain issues.
Awesome.
Here's what doesn't matter,
Right.
that you don't need to care about, but here's what you might need to care about. And
Hmm.
if you do, then what you want to do is talk to your customer and say, do you still want this widget?
Right.
If it works like this, or can we go to something that maybe doesn't have all the bells and whistles but is more secure, and we'll
Right.
do that for you instead.
Hmm.
And so it gives us a chance, and again, that's exactly what I do. And I also do some training. I feel like giving back, and so I've been doing some training in CIA schools, playing
Nice.
role player. Like I played the role player of a chief of station once.
Oh, well,
And
it
I
sounds like
was
you know what you're talking about, though.
the students were, part of my station, and I was like to the intel officer, "We'll have you blah blah blah," kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
was nice, but it was still it
Well,
was
coming from California, you're a natural actress, right?
yes, we
There you
all
go.
are from
There you go.
California.
Right.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we're all fruits and nuts, as friends out here call us. So,
Well, that's great. And it's one of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I got to tell the audience how I found out about Sue is that I had listened to her. She was on another podcast called Spy Talk, and she was so candid. She had great stories about her time in Russia, and I had to reach out and connect with her because I really. What I want to do is I want people to have a better understanding of what intelligence is. Canada doesn't necessarily have a national security or intelligence culture as strong as the United States. But I think it's growing. I think we're starting to learn how important it is for us to have this because it really is such a force multiplier for all the types of things that a country needs when it comes to its sovereignty, whether it's economically, politically, militarily. Having a strong national security and intelligence apparatus can make all the difference, and it gives you leverage with other countries. Our discussion is a perfect example of that, right? There's a lot of things that we share, a lot of threats, a lot of vulnerabilities that we can kind of cover each other's back off on because
seriously.
maybe there'll be representatives in a certain part of the world that they're more receptive to Canadians, or maybe there's a certain part of the world where the United States already has more of a foothold and we can kind of rely on that. And this is what we want to see happening going forward.
We
So,
want to keep it going
yeah,
forward. And like I said, I've seen nothing yet. I'll call you if I do, but I've seen nothing yet that says that that's going to go
going to
away.
change. Yeah.
And I am hopeful so far. Yeah.
Well, you let me know if Langley needs any more role players. I can do anything from Crazy Canuck to I don't know, whatever else, supply chain infiltrator if you need that. Maybe I could be your bad guy.
Here's the problem is you can't be a role player until you actually speak real English.
Oh, that's it.
Which
Okay, I'll hold off on the.
California American English, nothing
Oh,
else.
okay.
So then I
On
would
my. I'll have
support
to
you.
work on my Valley Girl.
Yeah, thank you.
Well,
It's
listen,
just
Sue, I
what.
want to thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're a busy lady and you probably got a lot of people knocking on your door asking you to provide insight and information, and you were kind enough to take the time to do that here. And I can't thank you enough. And hopefully, we can have you on either again on Intelligence Conversations and talk about something else, or maybe have you on one of the other podcasts like Spies Like Us. And I'm sure that Al and Phil would love to pick your brain about everything US and what's going on down there or what has been going on down
Happy to.
there. And yeah, I just want to thank you very much. And if there's one more thing I'd like to ask you,
Mhm.
I did this in my last intelligence conversations with Ivana Mooney. As a woman in intelligence and in your career, what would you give to young women who are thinking about getting involved in intelligence? Like, what kind of advice would you throw out to them?
So here's the deal, go for it.
Yeah.
I joined at a time, we had like, I don't know, 60, 70 people in my class, and seven of us were female.
Okay.
And we had a couple of Asian men and maybe one black man. So we're talking in the mid 80s, and
Okay.
we're talking at a time when we were starting to think about, other, like thinking about, women's rights. Obviously, it already happened in the 60s to some extent and 70s, and as well as the fact that it's the right thing to do is from a human perspective to
Right.
treat everybody with the same respect of
Hmm.
whatever color or whatever gender you are.
Yep.
And so that's important. That's peace. I mean, that's it's a key piece of all of this.
Right.
But the other reason that we want to hire women and people from all kinds of walks of life, the people that came from the richest part of the world of the America and the poorest part,
Right.
because these having that kind of diversity in a meeting when you're trying to come up with an operational plan
Hmm.
means that everybody's looking at it slightly differently,
Hmm.
and then you can hear it all. And I can't tell you how many times it was like, oh my God, I'm so glad I have, this guy Joe here,
Yep.
this gay guy from Arkansas,
Yep.
and because he brought in something that nobody else kind of could think of.
Right.
And so we all have very diverse thinking. It doesn't matter what color we are or what gender we are. It's just a matter of needing all of that to do our mission.
Yeah.
And sometimes we need it simply because a African American American or Canadian,
Hmm.
Canadian of African descent, can do more in Africa
Yep.
than we can,
Yep.
uh, quietly. You
Great.
know,
Great. There's
I
great
can
advice.
I can do plenty in Europe or
Yep.
Canada,
Hmm.
as a white female, but it is great to have that diversity, not just for something as tactical as that, but for the conversation and coming up with the plans.
Yep. And when you're dealing with humans, the
Yeah.
more humans you have who can add to that operational
Yes.
plan, this isn't ones and zeros. This is about how
Yes.
do we get this person on side? How do
Yeah.
we keep them motivated? So
Yeah.
again, Sue, thank you so much.
You are so right.
We're coming to the end here, but I really do appreciate that. I hope you agree to come on again, or at least maybe come on to Spies Like Us so we can talk more about your expertise and everything that you have to offer. And
Happy to
again,
help anytime. You're a great guy.
That wraps up this episode of Intelligence Conversations. If you enjoyed this deep dive into China's growing intelligence footprint with retired CSIS officer Susan Miller, be sure to stay connected. For weekly analysis on espionage, sabotage, terrorism, and everything spy-related, tune into Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or just ask your smart speaker to play it. If you'd like to support the show and the effort that goes into bringing you these exclusive conversations, visit Neil's Buzzsprout or Patreon pages. Whether it's a one-time donation or continued support, it helps keep the intelligence flowing. Don't forget to leave a comment, hit like, and share this podcast with others who care about national security and global intelligence. Thanks for listening, and remember, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.